Hello everyone, welcome to your lecture series on food insecurity. I will be covering your global nutrition challenges to meet sustainable developmental goal number 2, which is zero hunger. It's a 3-part lecture series and this is the first part of it. So when I say global nutrition challenges and sustainable developmental goal number 2, what exactly is the SDG-2? It is referring to ending hunger, achieving food security and improving nutrition and promoting sustainable agriculture. We will be covering snapshot of specific data which shows you what are the global nutrition challenges in meeting the SDG-2. I'll be covering a few topics in this as it's highlighted over here that we will be looking at data which shows that we are not on track with the global nutrition targets of 2025. Now they have been extended to 2030 because we are not on track with meeting the global nutrition challenge, global nutrition targets. Therefore, our diets which shows data which shows that they are increasingly harming our health and the planet. The financial cost of addressing poor diets and malnutrition which has risen. And in the second part of the lecture series, I'll be covering the impact of COVID-19 and food insecurity. And in the third part of the lecture series, we'll be also looking at the impact of conflict and war zone on food insecurity. So these are the topics that we will be covering in your 3-part lecture series. We'll start with the first part, which is data that indicates we are not on track in meeting the global nutrition targets. So yes, if this slide is not clear, my apologies, but if you go to the website which is provided over here, you will have further details about the global nutrition targets. So I'll just briefly go through the global nutrition targets so you know that, all right, what are the global nutrition targets and what is the data saying? Are we on track in meeting these global nutrition targets or not? So yes, firstly, the global nutrition targets were highly ambitious. We had planned to meet these targets by 2025, but because of COVID, because of conflicts and so on and so forth, the nations decided it is not possible to meet these targets by 2025, and now they have received an extension to meet these targets by 2030. So what are these targets? I'll be looking at my laptop screen because it's a bit in the distance to read the slide. So yes, the first target is to reduce stunting by 40% in children under 5 years of age. The second target is to reduce anemia by 50% in women of reproductive ages. The third target is to reduce low birth weight and that is by 30% in infants who are born. The fourth target is to halt the rise in childhood overweight and obesity, completely halt the rise of childhood overweight and obesity by 2030. Alright, and then it is to encourage exclusive breastfeeding and for the first 6 months, that is, and this target should be met by at least 50% by all of the nations who are involved in this project. Then we have the sixth target, which is to reduce and maintain wasting to less than 5% in children, which is under 5 years of age. And then we have the global non-communicable disease targets. These are also falling under the canopy of global nutrition targets and they are part of the sustainable developmental goal number 2. Alright, so what are the 3 key non-communicable disease targets that are related to nutrition? Well, the first one is to reduce salt intake by 30%. The second one is to reduce the rise in blood pressure, high blood pressure that is, by 25%. And similar to the childhood obesity, the target for adults is to halt the rise in overweight and obesity in adults. And again, this is by 2030 and also halt the rise in diabetes in adults as well. Alright, so these are the targets that the nations decided that they should be meeting by 2030. Okay, so we'll progress further. So yes, what does the data show? So basically there is a report card that comes out every year It is called as the Global Nutrition Report. Over here, as you can see, it's called Global Nutrition Report. So this report card, the latest report card is for the year 2021, and the report, which is just last year, and the Global Nutrition Report card, which is the Global Nutrition Report, shows that unfortunately we are not on track with meeting the global nutrition targets. Just to give you an idea, that the Global Nutrition Report, it provides data on the state of the global nutrition targets, which are concerning diet and nutrition, for 194 countries that are part of this this endeavor of meeting the global nutrition targets and therefore meeting the sustainable developmental goals. So it's a very big report card where we have updates of 194 countries who are joining this endeavor. The Global Nutrition Report is published annually. As I said, it's a yearly thing, and the last one was in 2021. And yes, this is by the World Health Organization. This has been endorsed and supported by the World Health Organization. The 2021 synopsis, a summary report card, is present in this YouTube video. It's a Facebook video actually, also available on Twitter, and it is directly by the Global Nutrition platform. So let's have a look at this video. I'll just go to the video and we'll play it so you can have a quick snapshot of the report card. Just bear with me. Yep.
We are facing a global nutrition crisis. Poor diets and resulting malnutrition in all its forms continue to be unacceptably high across the world. Now diets are increasingly harming our health and the planet. Unhealthy diets are now responsible for over a quarter of all adult deaths every year. And global food demand is now creating more than a third of global greenhouse emissions. Despite some progress, the current pace of change is too slow in almost all countries, and financial costs of addressing poor diets and malnutrition are rising, while resources are projected to fall. But the costs of inaction are far greater. The need for bolder, sustained and coordinated action on nutrition has never been greater. This fight is winnable. In this nutrition year of action, we need stronger commitments, greater accountability and systematic monitoring to accelerate progress and ensure we stay on track. With a step change in efforts and financial investments, we can end poor diets and malnutrition to enable healthy populations, prosperous economies, and a sustainable planet. Find out more in the 2021 Global Nutrition Report out.
All right, everyone. So I hope this gave you a little bit of a snapshot of the current status of the Global Nutrition Report. And yes, of course, in this part of the first part of the series of my presentation, we will be going through these targets and the results in a bit more detail. So these are the results that the video was mentioning in brief, which is we are not on track with the global nutrition targets of 2025, and therefore we have received an extension till 2030 to meet these targets. So what is the overall trend? The overall trend is that most of the countries are not on pace to meet the targets. Worldwide, we have 149.2 million children under the age of 5 years who are stunted. We have 45.4 million children who are wasted, and we still have 38.9 million children who are overweight/obese. And if you look at the graph, you just have one country, for example, who is on pace at reducing anemia in women of reproductive age. The yellow bits of all of these graphs are showing you the number of countries that are not on pace in meeting the global nutrition targets. Alright, so yes, as you see, the majority of the graph is yellow in color. These rings are yellow in color, which indicates that a lot of countries, majority of the countries are not on pace, and if this slow pace continues, we may not be able to achieve our targets by 2025, and hopefully we can achieve them by 2030, but the coming reports will tell us more. Alright, then what about the non-communicable disease targets? How are we doing with that? So, yep, we are still not on pace with that. We have approximately 40% of the world population which is overweight or obese, that is adult population. No country is on course in meeting the rise in adult obesity. No country is on course to achieve the targets of reducing salt intake as well. And again, if you look at the graphs, you can now interpret them that the yellow rings which are there, these signify the countries that are not on pace at meeting the global nutrition targets. And if you see that in terms of adult obesity, none of the countries are on pace at meeting the targets. In terms of reducing salt intake, none of the countries are at pace at meeting the global nutrition targets. So yes, the results are quite appalling and quite saddening, but this is the fact and this is the reality, and therefore we need champions like us, dietitians, to go out there and make a difference. So yeah, you will be you're training yourself to become competent health professionals, and you will be contributing positively to the society. As you can see, people, the world needs people like us. All right. Okay. Alright, so what is the next thing which the report card tells us? The report card tells us that our diets are increasingly harming our health and the planet. And how is that so? If you look at this figure, it shows that 61% of the countries globally, they are not meeting the recommended intake of whole grains. So various countries have their various recommendations, their various guidelines for their whole grain intake, vegetable intake, so on and so forth. Similar to what we have in Australia. For example, we have the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating, which tells the general population the amount of fruit, veg, grains, etc. that we should be having. In Australia, similarly, you have guidelines all across the world. So what this report cards did is, it looked at the population of each country and the guidelines which are developed in each country, and is the population meeting the guidelines of that country. Alright. So yes, globally 61% of the countries are not meeting the recommended grain intake, whole grain intake. And if you look at North America particularly, that is the highest proportion of population is 81% in North America, and they are not meeting their whole grain intake. And similarly with fruits, 60% of the countries are not meeting the recommended intake of fruits, and Asia is scoring even higher, which is 65% of the population in Asia is not meeting the fruit intake. With veggies, you have 40% of the countries that are not meeting the recommended intake of veggies, and in Africa this is quite high, which is that in comparison to all countries, Africa is, for example, the highest in terms of proportion of people who are not meeting the recommended intake of veggies. And when it comes to processed food or discretionary foods, as we call it in Australia, globally, all of the countries together, they are having 377% greater intakes of processed foods, discretionary foods, than their guidelines and then their recommendations. And within this figures, you have the Oceania, you have the countries within the Oceania region which are scoring the highest, which is they are having 740%, the proportion is higher than the recommended intake of discretionary food within those countries and within those guidelines. So yes, basically overall what does this say? That no region is meeting recommendations for healthy diet and the nutritional guidelines that are suggested by individual countries. And globally we are not doing a good job. Alright, so yeah, the second part of the data shows that our diets are increasingly harming our health and the planet. And what does this show? This shows that nearly a quarter, and specifically a bit more than quarter, which is 26% of all deaths among adults, this is attributed to poor diets. So deaths by non-communicable diseases. But what was the underlying factor for non-communicable diseases for more than 12 million people? Well, it was poor diets which attributed to deaths, right? And the proportion of premature deaths which could be attributed to dietary risk. And if you remember now, we spoke about attributable risk ratios. right? So if you remember from one of your lectures, so well, this is how it is interpreted in the global data, that premature deaths, when we talk about premature deaths, and that is due to dietary risk, this is the premature deaths that can be attributed to dietary risk. This is the highest in North America and European regions, that is 31% each, and this is the lowest in the African continent, which is 17%. Alright, then yes, the overall consensus is that no region is on course to meet the sustainable developmental goals for reducing premature mortality due to non-communicable diseases, which is cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes, obesity. So we are not on course with that. It doesn't seem that we would be achieving this by 2025, right? Okay, then what else does it say? It says that our diets are not only harming our health, but it is also harming the planet. Why? Because the global demand which we have, the demand to have food, this has now increased greenhouse emissions by 35%. So yes, this is increasingly harming our planet as well. Food demand has increased as much as 14% since 2010, and animal sources of foods are the ones which are keenly responsible or predominantly responsible for the majority of the greenhouse emissions that are going on. And when we compare the type of dietary patterns, well, the North American diet, they have the greatest environmental impact, whereas the African and the Asian diets, they have the least amount of impact on harming the environment. And what is the overall conclusion from this? That yes, unfortunately, no region is on course to meet the sustainable developmental goals at limiting environmental burdens that are related to the food chain and the food system, right? So I hope this gives you a brief snapshot of what are the global nutrition challenges and what are the limitations, and what is the update and the status of meeting these global nutrition challenges. Well, it's not a very promising picture. Alright, then the financial cost of addressing poor diets and malnutrition has also increased, right? And what do I mean by this? For example, the financial cost to meet global nutrition target, this has grown significantly since COVID-19. Yes, the financial cost to meet global nutrition target was expensive always, but now because of COVID-19, this has increased even furthermore. And there is an example that I have given over here. For instance, to meet the targets of stunting, wasting, and to address maternal anemia and to encourage exclusive breastfeeding. Well, yes, the targets were that we would be needing approximately $7 billion annually to meet these four targets, for instance. But now we need, which is after COVID, we would be needing approximately 10.8 billion to allow for the impacts of COVID. So yes, it is quite a big budget previously as well, 7 billion to meet these targets by individual governments, individual countries. But now because of COVID and the financial implications of COVID, we need a lot more money in simple terms to meet these targets. Alright, then for example, we have a second example over here, that to meet sustainable developmental goal, which is the overall entire goal of zero hunger, approximately we needed 39 to 50 billion annually, and we are talking on a yearly basis. Annually, that is what would be needed. But we also have to keep in mind that the economic gain which we would be having by meeting the sustainable developmental goal, this would reach to about 5.7 trillion a year by 2030 and about 10.5 trillion a year by 2050. So yes, we would be spending, and the governments across the globe and across the countries would have a lot of budgeting to do to meet the sustainable developmental goal number 2, which is zero hunger, and this seems to be around 39 to 50 billion annually. But then this would give us a lot of gains in return as well. As you can see that the gains, the economic gains would be say 5.7 trillion, and say by 2050 it would be 10.5 trillion. So yes, we would be gaining a lot as well. But yes, currently the scenario is that we would be needing to invest a lot more money to meet these sustainable developmental goals, and therefore then cherish in those gains. But Yes, right now it's a time of depreciation and economic crisis, and every one of us is also individually experiencing that, right? So yes, guys, this is a brief snapshot, a report card on what is the current status of the global nutrition targets to meet sustainable developmental goals, what is the impact of COVID-19 on food security and conflict-induced war zones on food insecurity. I'll be talking about that in the coming lecture series. Thank you.